All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode on What the Sheet. And in today's episode, we're going to be testing out the Skil 5.5-inch circular saw with a 4 amp hour battery. I don't know if you can see that there, but it's a 4 amp hour battery, fully charged. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be seeing how many cuts and how well it cuts through a 2x6 regular framing stud, and the rated cutting depth on the saw is 1 7/8 inches, so that puts you just past a regular 2x4. So we should have no problem cutting through it depth wise. I have used this already on a few other projects, mainly the garbage cabinet, the tip-out garbage cabinet I just made for my wife. I don't think Skil says how many cuts it'll do on a battery charge. I would guess with a 4 amp hour battery, I should be able to cut this whole 2x6 down, which is I think a 5-foot, 6-foot long board. And we're just gonna do thin strips, just as long as I get a full pass with the blade. That's all I'm really looking for. There's no nails in this. There's no real big knots. It's a pretty clean board. It's been sitting in my garage for like a year, so it's dried up pretty well. Yeah, so I'm gonna set you up and we're just gonna go to town, and we'll see whether the saw gives out because it's overheating or we just run out of juice on the 4 amp hour battery. If I do end up running out of juice before I get to the end of the 2x6 with the 4 amp hour battery, I have a 2 amp hour battery that's fully charged. I'll grab that and I can do a side by side, and we can see how well the 2 amp hour battery cuts versus the 4 amp hour battery. Just because with other Skil tools that I have, I've noticed that by adding that 4 amp hour battery, I seem to get a little bit more power out of it, even if it's a brushless tool. Typically, you don't see a whole lot of difference between a 2 and a 4 amp hour battery in some cases, but with the Skil 12 volt tools, it seems like when you add that extra 2 amp hour battery pack on there, you seem to get a little bit, just a touch, maybe like 5 or 10% more juice out of the tool, which is in some cases can be pretty handy. So we'll try that on this 2x6 if we have space for it. Otherwise, we'll do it on the 2x4 at the end. But that's all I got. So I'm gonna get started. We'll do our cuts, and then once we're done, we'll come back and I'll kind of give you my final thoughts. Okay, so got them all done. I picked all the pieces up and counted them. Should be 107. I'll double check and put the number on the bottom of the screen. On the end here, this very first stack, I have the 3 chunks that broke. None of them were cut too skinny. Like I didn't veer off and cut a half of one or anything like that. It's just those 3 broke. The rest of them came out fine. Most of the thicknesses are basically from about 1/4 inch to somewhere a little bit chunkier to maybe about 3/8 to close to 1/2 inch. But they're all relatively consistent in thickness. Like I said, none of them broke through, and the chip out and kind of the blowouts on the backside are all relatively consistent. Something similar to what I've seen with regular circular saws cutting 2x4 or 2x material in the past. So 107 cuts through a 2x6 regular framing stud with a 12 amp hour saw with a 12-volt saw, 4 amp hour battery, I think is pretty good. Let's see what else. So in the middle of the little time lapse there, you saw probably a little bit of a jump in between and about the midway point or 2/3 of the way through. All that was is I actually had the saw cut out in one of my cuts. I was able to get it going, finish the cut. I checked the battery level and it had 1 bar. So I was like, okay, it's probably done. Went over, stopped the camera, and I was like, well, wait, hang on. Sometimes, when you're getting low on juice, the saw will just cut out. So I went back, double checked the battery again, and it had recovered another bar. So it was at 2 bars. I was like, well, we'll just keep going then. So I started the camera back up, finished cutting, continued cutting on. And I was able to get probably another 30 cuts or so after that. And then at the end, when it kept cutting out for that last cut, when I stopped and checked the battery, the single bar was flashing green. So that indicated to me that the battery was dead or close to being dead, where it wasn't going to let tool function anymore. So I just said that's enough cutting. And in a real world situation or in a construction type situation or something like that, you typically wouldn't be doing 100+ cuts all in a row with a circular saw. If you're going to be doing that many cuts of a 2x material, you would usually want to go over to a miter saw, or you'd probably use a corded saw at that point if you're doing that many cuts. But I think a little 12-volt saw with a 4 amp hour battery doing 100 cuts is pretty good. And I know Milwaukee makes a 12-volt 5.5-inch saw, very similar to this. I want to say their saw is also a left-handed bladed saw. And on top of that, you can get 3 Skil 12-volt batteries, the 4 amp hour batteries, for the same price as one 6 amp hour battery from Milwaukee. So in theory, if you buy 3 of the Skil 4 amp hour batteries, that give you 12 amp hours of total juice, versus if you were to buy a Milwaukee 6 amp hour battery for the same price, so $120, $130, somewhere in there, you're only getting 6 amp hours of runtime or of juice. So you're basically getting twice the amount of runtime, in theory, going through Skil's battery platform. And then on top of that, Skil's 4 amp hour batteries for the 12-volt system, all of them come with the built-in USB charging. Whereas Milwaukee, you have to buy the little adapter piece and use it that way. So since that battery's dead, I have over here, we got 2 fully charged batteries. I got a 4 amp and a 2 amp. So there's a 2 amp battery, fully charged, and a 4 amp, fully charged. So what I'll do is I'll unhook the hose, because I'm not going to concern myself with dust collection. And we'll do 5 cuts with the 2 amp hour battery, and then 5 cuts with the 4 amp hour battery, and then I'll put them side by side, and you kind of see which ones cut the fastest or the slowest, however you want to determine it. And basically what I'll do is I'll just run the saw and push it through as hard as I can without trying to stall the saw out. And then at the end, like I said, I'll just put the video side by side on the screen, and you guys can just see and or hear maybe the little bit of difference between the 2 batteries. All right, so we got a little 2 amp hour battery on, like I said, fully charged battery, and we're gonna do 5 cuts as fast as I can without stalling this out. If I do stall it, I'll just reset as quick as I can. Do 5 cuts, and then we'll swap out for the 4 amp hour battery, do another 5 cuts, and I'll throw, instead of doing side by side, I'll just throw the time up on the screen, how long it takes each one at the end, and then we can go from there. And then at the end of the video, I'll go over some of the extra features on the saw, and then we'll call it a video. right, so we just did the cuts, side-by-side cuts, or the comparison between the 2 amp and the 4 amp hour batteries. And I was pushing pretty much as hard as I could through that 2x6. With it being so short, I was having a hard time kind of keeping it from wiggling around on me. But I didn't feel like I needed any more power to cut through that, which is really surprising for it being a little 12 volt saw. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're doing a remodel or some small framing or touch up, whatever, or just need to trim something to make it fit in a space, having a small little saw like this that can cut through a 2x4 or a 2x6 or a 2x material is super freaking handy to have. I wish I had some treated 2x6 laying around or 2x4 laying around, because I could see how well it cuts through that, because the treated lumber is a little bit more dense typically. But other than that, regular framing lumber, no problem. Going over some of the features on this saw. So it has your traditional, it's got most of your tools or things that you would think of for a saw. It's got your tool for changing your blades out. It has an arbor lock on the top side here. You just push that in while you're cranking on the arbor, and it locks it in place. You have the ability to manually lift your dust shroud or the blade guard as you're cutting. One nice feature is it's got the dust port that comes with the saw itself, and then it's just a single screw on the bottom here to attach it. And then this fits on, I don't know the diameter of the hose off the top of my head, but it's basically the same diameter as that little Home Depot bucket head hose, whatever that is. And I just have that little adapter was from Rockler, so that little blue piece just fits right over the top of this, and it's the same one that I used for my track saw. So that's one nice thing. To adjust the depth, it's just this little lever here on the back side, and then it has etched in marks. Let's see if you can kind of see them. Yeah, you can kind of see them there. They're just stamped in on the metal on the how far down it is. So you got quarter, half inch, 3/4, 1 inch, inch and a quarter, inch and a half, and then you can go just past that, and that's what gives you that. It's like inch and 5/8 or inch and 7/8, I think, or inch and 3/4, somewhere in that range. It's a little over inch and a half full depth on this bad boy. Moving to the front, I think when I did my unboxing video, I mentioned that it looks like you can get an edge guide for this tool. Still haven't found one. Skil doesn't look like they sell one on their website, so I'm not sure. I might be able to buy some aftermarket or third-party some blade edge guide that would fit in here. Or if anything, I can just make my own. I really feel up to it. Moving on to the miter gauge or the angle gauge. Same kind of deal as the depth gauge. It's all stamped into the metal itself. So we go from 0, we got markings at, looks like every 5 degrees. So 0, 5, and then it labels 10, 15, 20. It's got a 22.5 hash, 25, 30, 40, 45, and then it maxes out at 50 here at the very top. And then one last thing to cover is on the front edge. Let's see if I can get this on camera here. It also has a ruler along the whole front edge of the blade here, and it has a marking for when you're cutting at 45 degrees. And I'll put on the screen what they're rating the depth of cut is for when you're cutting at an angle of 45 degrees. But you have, looks like from about 1.5 inches on the left side, what would be the left side of the blade, all the way to, 4.5 inches, it looks like, on the other side, on the right side of the blade. So you got a pretty good width of the plate here, and it's kind of nice having these markings. So if you're wanting to, let's say, cut 1 inch from the outside edge or something like that, you can draw your line or do whatever. Or if you're just trying to follow a line, but you want to be offset of that line, all you got to do is just keep that lined up, and then you should be good to go. One, I guess, final thing that I'll mention with this is smaller bladed circular saws will want to twist more when you're running them through a piece of material, whether that's 2x material, like a 2x6, 2x8, something like that, or through sheet goods like plywood, like I have laying over here. Since the blade's a smaller diameter, you can more easily adjust, your left or right if you need to. If you're cutting and you're coming off track, you can easily kind of angle that blade back to on track. But at the same time, it also will get off track a lot easier than it would if you had like a 6 1/4 or a 7.5 inch or 7 1/4, 6.5 inch bladed saw. Just because of that diameter, you can a lot more easily just turn that blade and cut, sharper angles and stuff like that with this. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're cutting material is you're probably not going to get straight cuts as easy with something like this just because of how small the blade is. But other than that, saw's great. I'm definitely glad I bought this, and it'll definitely be a replacement for my rigid circular saws that I've had laying around that I have batteries for, but I just don't like using it just because the batteries are getting old. I don't really want to pull out a whole 7.5 or 7 1/4 inch saw to rip down, to cut a 2x4 versus, if I have something like this, I can just slap battery on it quick, cut it, and then I'm done, and I can go set this somewhere, and it's small, and I can hide it in either one of my Milwaukee packouts or my rigid roller base there, and I can have it all nice and tight versus the rigid circular saws are a lot bigger. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments. I check it every day in between working and coming home. I go up on my phone, I check them, answer any questions you guys have or any comments. Next Tuesday will be the Master Force impact driver on the Torque Test Tuesday, and we're going to be I got new bolts and all that stuff, so we should be okay with that. Hopefully we're not going to break anything there, and that's all I got for you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.